Hi, I'm Ramona Smith, and I'm going to be talking about this drawing that I made of the Discobolus, specifically the Palombara Discobolus, and my process in making that and what it taught me about the original work. And to complement that, I'll be going into a bit of a artistic analysis of the original work. So I made this drawing because I think, as somebody with an art history focus, it's important to understand how artwork is made and created. And while this is a drawing and the original is a sculpture, there's a similar process in understanding how a human form is created. And yeah, in the way use of shadow and line and addition versus subtraction in space, and and those sculptures kind of the opposite, where there are shadows you take away versus when you're drawing you add. So, but it still teaches you something about how to create a form and the attention to detail of the human body that it takes to create a realistic form. And so when I was making this drawing, I thought that it was very difficult to display the musculature as being very intensely flexed and engaged, which is something that the original does very well, and capturing that full, like, hard, round quality of a muscle that's in full engagement. And I definitely do not do it as well as Myron did, but I tried, and it also made me notice kind of the manipulation of shadow and depth by using shadows to create this fully fleshed out form, which is something Myron must have considered in his creation of the Discobolus, was how the shadows fell because of the features and the carving. And so to complement that, I'm going to go into a bit of an artistic analysis of the Discobolus. This was kind of my secondary option to the context essay I wrote about the propaganda use of the Discobolus, and so to start off, this form is highly idealized, obviously, despite the fact that this body is highly engaged in this intense athletic act. The face is still very serene and stoic. And this is something that the Greeks did often. They would, in their depictions of their battles with other groups of people, they would depict themselves highly idealized, while the other group of people the opposite. And that was something the Greeks were always trying to do, was just try to be the most idealized forms of themselves and depict themselves that way. And so you can really see this in here of this body that's, all of the muscles are engaged to show that they're there. And that's part of the reason that, and partly the reason of that is Myron's wanting to show off his skills of creating this form, but a lot of it is just wanting to represent that idealism. And you can see that further in how the arm just kind of completely reaches as far as it humanly can. The muscles, you can see the veins in the arm and how the veins in the hands are gripping this discus. And yet, despite the fact that the arm is reaching out literally as far as it can, the face is still stoic and the form is still very dynamic. And you can see that dynamic quality of it in the lines that it creates. So there's this big circular line that follows the shoulders all the way down to this leg, which really guides the eye. So it comes down here, but once it gets to here, there's this line that goes from the head and curves down the body this way. And so the eye is drawn from the discus down to right about here, where his face is, really emphasizing that this is not about the discus being thrown at all. This is about the face, and this is about Greeks and their perfection. And you can see that in the entire form. However, there's also this intense juxtaposition of many things within the form. You can see that in the fact that there are these beautiful curved lines, but then there's also these kind of stark folding lines here and here, which just really displays how complex human beings are. And yeah, and you can see that in the openness versus the closedness, how open his arms are, but how closed and hunched over his abdomen is, and yet his face is still looking up. And it's just incredible how Myron is able to display this such complexity, even in an idealized form, of humanity and how humans are presented. And yeah, and there's such intimacy in depicting a body so perfectly and so idealized. There's such attention to detail in the body and such openness. And it must have been, Myron must have paid such close attention to the human form, and that's how he was able to depict this. And even though it is highly idealized, at the same time, to me, it still feels very raw and real in that juxtaposition. The only way that it could be more so would be if the face was a little bit more clenched and focused to make it more intimate, more about the human experience. And but that's obviously not what the Greeks were about. So yeah, and yeah, so it must have taken immense attention to detail for him to create this work, and just understanding how the human body functions and how the muscles in the body move and work, even to create a highly idealized form, it still has to be realistic in some way. And yeah, and so that brings me back to my drawing, which in contrast is not as good as his, but definitely teaches me how much he knew about the human body and how amazing it is that he was able to create this 3D form of the human body. Yeah. And just how immense of a feat that is.